Welcome to tonight's session of the 2023 Charleston Literary Festival, and we welcome you to the Dock Street. Thank you for following the guidelines and enjoying the concessions, which is a new added bonus this year. Outside of the theater, please note the emergency exits along with the restrooms, and we have hats, shirts, coffee mugs, and more while supplies last. We also invite you to join or visit the Buxton Books table where you can have a signed, personalized copy of the book that we'll be discussing tonight. My name is Jeffrey Fielding. I'm the Public Programs Manager for the International African American Museum, and it's my happy privilege to introduce the panel and the moderator that you will have on this evening. Mr. Joseph McGill Jr. is the Thank you. Is the founder of the Slave Dwelling Project and a history consultant for Magnolia Plantation in Charleston, South Carolina. By arranging for people to sleep in extant slave dwellings, the Slave Dwelling Project has brought much needed attention to these often neglected structures that are vitally important to the American-built environment. Since 2016, Mr. McGill expanded the Slave Dwelling Project to offer a program of living history called Inalienable Rights. Living History Through the Eyes of the Enslaved. The project has held an annual conference every year since 2013. He is married to the former Miss Valerian Mosey, and they have one daughter, Jocelyn Mosey McGill. Mr. Herb Frazier. Mr. Frazier is a Charleston, South Carolina-based writer. He is senior projects editor at the Charleston City paper. He's the former marketing director at Magnolia Plantation and Gardens in Charleston. Before he joined Magnolia, Frazier edited and reported for 5 daily newspapers in the South, including his hometown paper, the Post and Courier. His international reporting includes West Germany during the fall of the Berlin Wall, humanitarian relief efforts in Bosnia and Rwanda during its post-genocide, social and political issues in Japan and South Korea, and Cuba's cultural ties with Florida and the Low Country. Frazier's most recent book, Sleeping with the Ancestors, How I Followed the Footprint of Slavery, was co-written with Joseph McGill, founder of the Slave Dwelling Project. His forthcoming book, Crossing the Sea on a Sacred Song, is the story of an African funeral song that links a Georgia family with a woman in Sierra Leone. Let's give both of them a round of applause again. Last but certainly not least, I would like to introduce our interlocutor for the evening, Dr. Felice Ferguson Knight. Dr. Knight is a native of Charleston, South Carolina. She is the Director of Education at the International African American Museum. Her professional mission is to retrieve and share unheard stories from marginalized, ethnically diverse, and understudied communities. She's been employed as an adjunct faculty member in the Department of Humanities at Columbus State Community College, a visiting professor of Black Studies at Denison University, and a diversity, inclusion, equity, and accessibility consultant with Leilani Brown, LLC. Her doctorate is in African American history from The Ohio State University. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Sleeping with the Ancestors.
All right. Good evening, everyone. It truly is my pleasure to be with these distinguished gentlemen this evening. We hope to have a free-flowing, organic conversation that will take you through a little bit of their relationship together, how they met, and how this is related to the book that they co-wrote together, the development of the project, and certain aspects of the story itself, making sure that the little-known aspects of American slavery are told in an engaging and authentic way. And then also a little bit about their hopes for the legacy of this project and for the book. So I will turn it over to Joe and to Herb to get started in just sharing a little bit about your relationship, because I think you two might know each other.
Yeah. I met this gentleman about maybe 15 or so years ago. It might have been a little longer than that. He may have a different version of this story. But I became employed at Magnolia Plantation and Gardens, and he was working there, and he was the marketing director. At that time, I had this idea kind of in my head about slave dwellings and bringing attention to them, because places like Magnolia Plantation and Gardens and other plantations, antebellum sites, would tell the stories of the sites, but there were missing elements. The missing elements were the stories of the people who were enslaved at those sites. You know, you would hear about the nice, beautiful, architecturally significant buildings, but I shared with Herb this idea about, you know, sleeping in slave dwellings. He thought it was a good idea, and he stated that if I wanted to pull it off, you know, he would help as much as possible with the marketing of, you know, performing that act, or because that act, as he stated, was something that would be pounced upon by folks wanting to know more, journalists wanting to know more. So there I was explaining it to him, and there he was encouraging me to, you know, to get started with this idea of sleeping in slave dwellings. So that's kind of how we met. Now, he tells a story about us meeting earlier, so I'll turn that over to him.
Well, Joe, we did meet much earlier. It was in the early 90s when, shortly after you founded the reenactment group, Massachusetts 54th Civil War Reenactment Group. And at the time, I was president of a local journalism organization called the South Carolina Coastal Association of Black Journalists, and we were, at the time, affiliated with the National Association of Black Journalists. And we were doing that conference here in Charleston, and we had journalists from around the Southeast coming to Charleston. We wanted to show them a little bit of Charleston, the Gulf culture and other history. And you was at Fort Sumter portraying a Civil War soldier. You were in uniform, you were standing in front of a little fire there at Fort Sumter. It was at night, it was cold, we were freezing, but you captivated us because you told the story very eloquently of a Civil War soldier. And I put that in the back of my mind, that, you know, we will connect. And we stayed in touch over the years. And then fast forward to the Boone Hall experience with the History Channel and Magnolia, and then that's when we started communicating on a much more relevant basis, consistent basis, and we ended up with this thing here. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely old friends because you have two versions of the story, and yours is exceptionally detailed, Herb. I love it. It was freezing.
It was
cold.
It was cold.
So you know for a fact this is when you met.
Yeah.
And that's really important. You know, the fact that, Joe, you were doing this important work of making sure that African-American soldiers from the Civil War were recognized for their heroic contributions to our country's fight, and that you met in those circumstances, and then, you know, shared this idea of sleeping in slave dwellings. If you wouldn't mind, talk a little bit about the inspiration for simply doing that, starting to talk together about this. I know it had something to do with your military service and so forth.
Yeah. I was fortunate enough when I was in Amsterdam, I went to the place where Anne Frank hid from the Germans. And when I was in that space, that very small space, I then realized what my teacher was trying to teach me when I was in the class while being taught that and not paying attention. But being in the space it made it all different. It made it all real. It made it relevant. It made me know that places are important. Although all the history associated with these places is not always positive, it's still history that needs to be interpreted. So that was kind of the seed that was planted. And it lay dormant for all that time until I started working for the National Trust for Historic Preservation. and seeing that they had a formula for preserving buildings. But it was those buildings that were iconic, architecturally significant. And being a Civil War reenactor at the time that I became a Civil War reenactor, when I was a park ranger at Fort Sumter National Monument, and trying to be persuaded by Confederate reenactors to join their forces, I said, wait a minute, I'm not joining you for you to remember your ancestors and what they did to my ancestors. I'm not joining your side. I don't need to portray that. But then the movie Glory came out, and I saw that there were African Americans that served for the Union during the Civil War, approximately 200,000 of them. And then I started that, the company I, 54th Massachusetts. But what that gave me the opportunity to do was, at these reenactments, we would have the opportunity to be intimate with these places, because at the reenactments themselves, the audience is there, they interact, they see us, shoot at each other and play dead and all that, and just reenact those battles. But after the dust settles and the crowd leaves, then we get the opportunity to talk to the opposing force, going from campfire to campfire and getting into the heads of some of the Civil War reenactors is not always a place to be in the head of the opposing force, because I met some guys that would probably not be wise to hang out beyond those reenactments, So, but what that did, it took the slave dwelling project to another level. Another one of those seeds planted, as I said, when I went into the space of Anne Frank. It planted that seed to let me know sleeping in slave dwellings is easy. Anybody can do that. Anybody can sleep. But the conversations that we have before we do these sleepovers is where the content now lies. Now we're getting more requests to have these conversations, more so than the sleepover itself. Although we will always rely on the sleepover as the gimmick, if you will, but it's a bait and switch. Yeah, you can sleep in these historic places with us, but before you do that, you're gonna have to sit down, we're gonna have a conversation about some things that we as a nation have to deal with, and sometimes we try to ignore, and we don't usually talk about things that we don't, if people don't look or think like us, sometimes we don't want to engage them in conversation. So now these conversations that we have around the campfire is now engaging people in those things. So the project has evolved in that sense.
Now, Herb, I know you weren't, out there with the campfires. It was cold when y'all met, but you weren't during the campfires. So tell me, what is it, tell all of us, what is it about this project that Joe presented to you that was attractive to you, and why you thought it needed to be something to promote to media and to spread?
Well, as a journalist, I was working at Magnolia at the time, so I was a recovering journalist. But I knew innately that what he was proposing to do is so, like he said, so simple, but so unique that the media would latch onto it. And so I'd send out the press releases, and then after a while, Joe saw that, he didn't need me anymore. The media was seeking him out after he got on NPR. Then he blew up, boom. And so we still communicated because we worked together at Magnolia. But fast forward to the point when we started working on the book, and what helped was, while he was doing his work, and he did the bulk of the work. I've only done about maybe 6 cabin stays and a few campfire discussions, but he's done over 150 in 25 states in the District of Columbia. That's a lot of hard wooden floors and a lot of different places around this country. And so as we started doing this, I had the benefit of the blogs that Joe wrote, and other people who had stayed with him, they also wrote blogs. So we started bringing those blogs together, and looking at what the personal experiences were that he had and others had. So that's an element of the book. At the same time, we knew that we wanted to bring the history of the places. We didn't write about every place, but the significant places, we wanted to bring out the history of the places. So that required research and interviews with the managers of some of these sites. But most importantly, we wanted to bring forward the ancestors, the voices of the ancestors, because when they were alive, they didn't have a voice. And so we wanted to give them that voice that they did not have. And the other thing that I wanted to pull out of Joe, because as he mentioned, the slave dwelling project morphed over the last 13 years. He started out with the idea that he was going to sleep in slave dwellings for 1 year in South Carolina, and his work was called the Slave Cabin Project. But as he went along, you noticed that you were in urban spaces and that not every enslaved person in this country lived and raised their families on cabins on a southern landscape, but they also were in urban settings. So the Slave Cabin Project turned into the Slave Dwelling Project. And as we talked, and I interviewed him, and we would meet weekly, either at his house or my house, over some pizza, chicken wings. He likes chicken wings hot. I don't like them hot, but that's enough. Yeah. I would try to pull out of him, how did this experience change Joe McGill? Because he's not the same Joe McGill in Mother's Day weekend 2010 that did the first cabin stay at Magnolia than what you see now, who convenes these very, very serious conversations around campfires around the country.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really grateful for the way that you broke down for us just the evolution of the writing process itself, because I know for any struggling writers out there, I'm going to raise my own hand there, it's really helpful to hear other people's processes. And, from what you shared, there was the initial interviews where you spoke with each other, sort of like in the field of history, our oral history interviews. And then from those conversations, you figured out, okay, and the combination of that with the blogs, we have some material here, right, that can be turned into a book. So talk a little bit about the process of writing. Your friends, are you still friends?
Oh, very much so, yeah. We talk daily. Hey, Joe, people get ideas. No, we talk every day. Right. You call me at 8:30 in the morning, or I'll call him at 4:30 when he's leaving Magnolia. But you're right, the writing, we met weekly, and I would write and I would send to him, email to him what I'd written during the week, and we would tweak it and change it. And once we got, a few chapters, I shared it with a good friend of mine, Steve Hoffius. I know Steve is out there. He said he was coming. If Steve, there he is. So I would send it to Steve, and Steve would say, do this, do more of that, go in this direction. And Steve's advice, early advice, helped direct us on the path that we followed. Now, I gotta say this, Joe gets asked a lot, and I'm sure that in the Q&A, y'all will ask Joe about ghosts. He don't believe in ghosts. But I must say, we do, and I think he's come along to believe that the spirits has guided us. Because in doing the research, and we found some incredible material that helped, again, to bring forward the voices of the ancestors that really rounded out and added a real authenticity to the story, and to make the places where he had been come alive with very interesting detail. And as you mentioned before we came to the stage, a lot of the things that most people don't know that you're not going to get in textbooks Certainly you won't get it in textbooks in Florida, but that's another
Or Texas.
or Texas, yeah, yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, so tell us about, let's see, for both of you, your favorite chapter or favorite story or set of stories that you tell in this book, from both
Yeah,
of you.
well, this thing is in silos, if you will, categories, and it's her creativity that kind of ties it all together. But in these different silos, we've got, of course, the plantations, because I think everybody who knows anything about slavery can, say something about a plantation that maybe they've visited or maybe they've learned about. And that's where my mind was initially coming into this project. I had my ideas where I learned that, enslaved people were happy, enslavers were benevolent. Again, that's what I was taught. And that's the place I did not want to stay. And in figuring out what categories of that we would involve in this book, of course there were the plantations, but then there was a lot missing from that. Because right here in this city, if we walk out of these doors, on this peninsula, there are so many slave dwellings that exist here. That's that urban slavery. That's that urban category of slavery that we missed. There are the presidential sites that we go to, a favorite section, chapter of mine, because 12 of our former presidents were slave owners. They didn't teach me that in school. They're the chief justices. We've gone there and stayed at sites. And then there's the northern element of slavery that certainly was not taught. In the 25 states that I've slept in these slave dwellings, 8 of those states have been northern states. And when I begin to tell people about what I do and why I do it, and I tell them that I've gone to northern states to apply what I do, then I get a lot of pushback. So the northern chapter is great because I get to educate. I get to let those northerners know. And I experience this a lot when I'm working at Magnolia Plantation and Gardens. When I open my presentation up to the audience, right at the end, I ask them where they're from. And they tell me, if they tell me they're from a northern state where I've spent the night in a slave dwelling, then I'll reveal to the whole audience about that experience. And a lot of them are learning for the first time. This slavery was not just a northern thing. We go in this chapter of the northern states, the fact that not only was once upon a time slavery existed in those states, but even after they legislatively abolished slavery, they were still complicit because that's where the banks were that were holding mortgages on people, these enslaved people. That's where the insurance companies were, putting insurance on these enslaved people. That's where the shipbuilders were, the ship owners were in these northern states. That's where those factories were, adding value to the cotton that was being picked. So, that's a great part of the book that I like the most because, again, it lets the public know that this slavery has a large footprint. The subtitle of the book, How I Followed the Footprints of Slavery. And it's all throughout these United States that this institution, this peculiar institution, persisted and existed.
Well, I like the stories of the enslaved who had agency and took it upon themselves to tell the stories and leave behind their experiences, like the poet Jupiter Hammond, who was enslaved in New York. And then, of course, Paul Jennings, who was enslaved by James Madison, who wrote a book about his experiences of working in the White House. And, of course, there's an interesting story that we, again, stumbled across Uncle Lewis, who was enslaved on an Alabama plantation, who after the crops were picked during a particular season, he had the ability to go off by himself and spend weeks, months on the property by himself and commune with nature because he had a relationship with the animals. He could talk to the animals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So,
I remember that story. I actually took a lot of notes about that because I felt like there was something that Uncle Lewis was trying to teach us, that, you know, no matter what situation we find ourselves in, we always need to find time to decompress and to connect with the literal land and everything that comes up out of it, because that's where we come from too. And so his story was very compelling. I'm really glad you mentioned that. And really, all of the things that you mentioned were some of my favorite chapters as well. The one on the presidents, as a former college professor, probably the thing that, and I taught African American history, the thing that astounded students the most was to learn about how ubiquitous the institution of slavery was. That it was not just a group, it was not just in one place, as you've already mentioned, and it wasn't just private individuals enslaving people, institutions enslaved people, cities enslaved people. Even, you know, the federal government rented enslaved people to do work. And so it's really important, you know, to sort of share this information. And so, you know, I'm curious to know and to share with our audience tonight, what is it that each of you want people to take away from this book? When they read it, what's that one thing or maybe one or two things that you want them to walk away saying, yes, now I know this?
I want them to know that our enslaved people had agency. You know, despite what the laws said they were, despite what the owners thought of them as, and that would be less than human, these people were still human beings. And it's because of them that, you know, that I'm here, I'm sitting here, because of the fact that they were here. So I want people to walk away from this knowing that the tribulations, the trials and tribulations that we deal with today, this thing is not, it didn't happen in our lifetime. This thing has a history. You know, we have our documents that make us who we are as a nation. You know, we have our Declaration of Independence, you know, all men are created equal. You know, and Thomas Jefferson is kind of all over that particular document. But you know, he enslaved 600 people. Of course, there's a Sally Hemings story. You know, I recall at Monticello sitting around the campfire having a conversation with descendants of Sally Hemings, and the conversation got so intense that there were those amongst the descendants who wanted to believe that that was a consensual relationship. Then there was the rest of them who thought not, and it got physical, almost got physical, before I intervened and had to break up the almost fist fight. So I want people to be aware of that, you know, and we talk about, you know, we the people, you know, James Madison, the father of our Constitution. You know, I think that there should be a comma after we the people. And after that comma should read in this room, because if you were not in that room, it meant nothing to you. And as we worship and cherish and learn about our presidents, we got to know that within that number of 47, are we at 47, 46, whatever number we're at now, you know, 12 of those were enslavers. You know, we had justices of these United States. And when we look at the wealth gap that exists today, the ability for the enslavers to create wealth deprive the ability of those that they enslaved to do the same. And we also have to, in connecting these dots and studying our history the way that we should study our history, we also got to think about those things even after slavery that continued to disenfranchise us, as in, the KKK and lynchings and convict labor and redlining and poll taxes and Jim Crow laws and black codes and massacres. So this book kind of points people in that direction. It gives people that incentive to do additional research and help connect those dots, help people know that, yeah, we are a great nation, but along the way we committed some atrocities, and this book focuses on one of those atrocities.
Well, I'm going to borrow a page from the IM's mission statement, and that is empathy. We would like for this book to generate some empathy so that people will understand and appreciate the contributions that our ancestors made, as Joe said, to the building of this country. Also, I want to steal a quote from my friend Bernie Powers, who says, "The past is always present," and that when you walk the streets of Charleston, be reminded that just a doorknob away is a history that still reverberates in this country today. And Joe spent a night dwelling on Longitude Lane.
25 Longitude Lane.
I wasn't going to give out the address because people, But anyway, since you got it out there, yeah, 25 Longitude Lane. And that, is right there at the center of our historic district, And people walk by and people come to Charleston and they marvel at this beautiful place, even this beautiful place where we're seated. Our enslaved ancestors, built this, no doubt. When the planters came here to see a performance on this stage, they brought their enslaved servants who sat in the pit, So that history is infused in Charleston, and I would hope too that it would, stimulate some thought, stimulate some curiosity, that people would like to come, maybe go see some of these places that we write about, and maybe strike out on your own discovery to find those stories that are hidden, and appreciate that history and appreciate those people who made what we enjoy today possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Bernie Powers is right. The past is always present. And, this impetus, and really it's a necessity today to do research. We have so much information at our fingertips, but sometimes, some of us choose to just read what we see, maybe passing through on the internet. And there are, of course, valuable sources on the internet, but maybe not take the time then to get into the archives and the research. And what you've done with this book is really make that research accessible to everyone by telling stories and by, to your point about empathy, what I found most profound is that in no way, shape, or form in this book do you hit people over the head with the history. That's not the way it's presented. It's really more presented in a way of you, Joe, showing how your learning has evolved over time. And that's really the story of all of us, right? That our learning evolves over time if we make space, right, for that evolution to occur, if we don't remain closed. And so I really do, hope that folks are inspired to do additional research. And as we were talking in the green room before we came out, because I will, share from my experiences as a college professor that much of the information in this book is not known to anyone besides specialists who have had the opportunity to read the archival records and to visit these sites not as visitors but as researchers. And so I really appreciate, bringing this material and making it accessible for all of us to partake of. So I'm curious, what's next?
Well, it's quite a bit. So the Slave Dwelling Project, we're a nonprofit organization. We've had 7 conferences so far. All those conferences so far have been in southern states. In fact, the last conference was right here in Charleston last year. We did it in partnership with the College of Charleston. Well, the conference for 2024 will be in a northern state, yet to be named, but a northern state. And we're going to hold them accountable. They've been getting a pass for too long. Now, I've just started a conversation with the Preservation Society. Some of you might be members or affiliated with them. So what we want to do is, some of you are homeowners out there that live in some of these antebellum homes that pertain to, but apply to what's written about in this book. You've got those slave dwellings attached to your home. We want access. We want access in the manner of, we invite people to this city to see all this beautiful architectural significance, all this antebellum architectural significance. Well, we want to focus on the places that this book is about, the slave dwellings in this city. And, we want to give folks the opportunity to come to these sites and concentrate on those places, in addition to the nice, beautiful, architecturally significant buildings that people come to see. So those are some things that we have planned for the immediate future. If you guys want to come out and hang out with us and sleep in one of these places with us, the invitation's open. We're putting together the 2024 calendar of where we're going. We're adding some new sites to the portfolio. If you guys know of some people in some of these places that we go, let them know we come in peace. We mean no harm. We are all about honoring the enslaved ancestors and honoring them through the preservation of these places. For those places who are out there doing the right thing, we want to highlight that. If you're out there not doing what you're supposed to do, like I came across a situation where they're using the slave dwellings as restrooms, that can't stand. We're on that case, so just know that we're about advocacy also, and making sure that our enslaved ancestors are honored in a manner that they should be honored. So those are some of the things that we have. And we're going to hire me an assistant because, right now it's people think that we're more than we are, which is good. But, right now it's just me, little old me. But we do have a board of directors from all throughout the United States, and we've got plans.
That's awesome. What's next?
Well, now that Joe's seen his name on a cover of a book, he wants to do it again to get that adrenaline rush again.
Sweet.
So we have an idea for a follow-up book. Yeah.
Ooh,
Yeah.
I can't wait. I mean, this one is just fantastic, and it just came out this year, so we will all be waiting with bated breath. We're very excited. So before we open up for questions, I just want to open the floor again to the two of you. If there's anything that you'd like to cover that we have not talked about this evening, please feel free to do so.
Well, I didn't mention this, and it's one of those things that sometimes people say, well, black people enslaved black people, and that happened. And we tell the story of Anna Kingsley at Kingsley Plantation. Anna Kingsley was enslaved, captured in what is now modern-day Senegal, sold into slavery in Cuba, and brought to northern Florida by Zephaniah Kingsley, who enslaved her, and they had children, but he made her his wife, and he gave her a plantation, which is now Kingsley Plantation, which is an NPS, National Park Service site. So that's a fascinating story.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was
And so
I
you're
was
gonna
so
go-
intrigued by that.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite places. But again, it sort of kind of plays into that, well, your people enslaved their people, black folks. But yes, that was the reality of the time. It was an economic reality of the time. But those are the kinds of stories that you can't, hide. You just tell it, and you tell it as best you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not about sugarcoating anything. We put it out there. I often get reminded that well, there were Africans selling Africans. They tell me that a lot. That there are those. And another thing, we're in a political season right now. It's getting hot and heavy. In fact, when we leave here today, we may have a new mayor of the city. I don't know. I hope you guys did what you needed to do to vote today. So I guess where I'm going with this is the situation is highly politically charged. And we're going to be going into states, the Slave Dwelling Project will be going into states where they've already legislated that they don't want the subject of this book to be taught to our youth. I anticipate that at some point this book is going to be on a banned list somewhere.
We hope.
And
Had to get sales. Huh?
it is what it is. I mean, we've got that subject matter that it's a trigger to some, and they just they just want to take us back to that place where I was when I graduated, thinking that my enslaved ancestors were happy to be enslaved, or that the people who enslaved them were good people, were benevolent. I'm not going to let that happen on my watch. As long as I can draw breath, as long as I can, I don't know how many more sleepovers I got left in this body. I don't know. I may have more. I'm sure I got more behind me than I have in front of me. But I'm gonna go to those places. I'm gonna continue to put those sites on the list of places to come visit. In 2024, 2025, however long it takes to do what I need to do to honor the enslaved ancestors.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So now we would certainly like to open the floor for questions from all of you. I'm not sure if there's a certain procedure. Microphones, I was told. Okay, all right, people are coming around. If you'll raise your hands, then we'll bring you the mic. I know I see hands over here and over here.
First of all, thank you. It really made me think tonight, and I wanted to commend both of you for your empathy, your sheer intelligence, and your curiosity. That propels us beyond you two gentlemen, and gentlemen is what you definitely are, you're gentlemen. You both have poetically expressed what was the essence of enslavement, being forced to be quiet, quiet. And what was the result of slavery, like great suffering, has given people empowerment to be strong, but also should give us the ability to think beyond, outside ourselves. And that's what I sort of like got out of what you said tonight. To really do better, not to always do better, to live life as one people, one egalitarian life, regardless of race, wealth, success, gender, age, and I don't know, both of you have given me great, great hope for the future, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Over here.
About 25 years ago, my wife and I came to Charleston. We hadn't been here too many times before. Now we're living here. But we toured a plantation, and I won't say which one, but we toured a plantation, and there was a nice elderly lady that took this group through, and she started talking about slavery. And she said, words to the effect, slavery really wasn't as bad as it's made out to be. The slaves worked in the fields, they worked in teams, they had an allotted amount of produce to harvest every day. And if they, as a team, finished harvesting the amount of produce, they could go back to their homes and tend their gardens and be with their children. It really wasn't that bad. Well, we were speechless. And I bring that up just to ask you, and I don't know how you measure this or answer it, but how much progress do you think there's been in Charleston or the country, whichever geography you choose, in correcting that misimpression?
Yeah. So we've got folks like our fine doctor here that make sure that that narrative is being corrected. We've got of course the International African American Museum that helps that process along. But along the way, that was pretty typical of what you would hear at some of these plantations. I often ask when I'm working at Magnolia Plantation, I ask folks, well, how many of you are visiting a plantation for the first time? A lot of those folks will raise their hands. I said, oh, that's a trick question. I said, I'm going to ask you that same question another way. So then I proceed. I said, well, how many of you visited Mount Vernon? Those hands will go up again. Monticello, hands will go up again. The Hermitage, in James K. Polk and other sites. I said, well then, what do those sites have in common? And they said, well, presidents. I said, why is it that you can visit those sites, plantations, and not know you visited a plantation? Then they get it. It's what you just said, sir. It's the way they've been telling the story, what they want their audience to hear to keep them in that comfortable place. Well, we counter that. We tell the truth. We tell what really happened at these sites. None of that sugar-coated stuff. Those days are behind us. Now, there are those who resist the message. They complain about them not coming to this site to hear about slavery. Well, it's a plantation. If you're not coming to the site to hear about slavery, then and if you left there satisfied because you didn't, then something's wrong somewhere. We contributed to the fact, the Slave Dwelling Project, this book has contributed to the fact that you very seldom hear those type of narratives anymore. The number of places that are still doing that is getting smaller. The number of places that are doing the right thing, telling the stories the right way, is getting larger. So hopefully you won't experience that again.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
To ask if you would consider Maryland as your northern state.
I don't know if that's north enough. Is it north enough?
Yes.
I've stayed in many places in Maryland. Last time I went to Maryland, I stayed at the Surratt House. That's where John Wilkes Booth stopped after he assassinated President Abraham Lincoln. And it's also the home of the First Lady, Mrs. Surratt, First Lady executed by the federal government for her action in assisting, in aiding and abetting. But yeah, I don't know if Maryland is north enough. All right.
Do we have any other? Okay, yes, in the back. Yes, sir.
Oh,
We can't see with the light, so I'm sorry. But I see you now. Okay.
I didn't realize it was in the back.
Okay, in the middle.
When people sleep in these historic slave dwellings and you have these conversations, do people connect the dots? Do you encourage them to connect the dots through the history of convict leasing that you mentioned and so on to the spaces of prisons today where it is still constitutional for people to be enslaved if it's a punishment for crime? And does that connection get made, and what do you think of that and how that relates to the project that you're doing?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I stayed in the old Charleston jail. And I know some people look at the old Charleston jail as the most haunted place in the city. Well, I've stayed in there 5 times. So, and I'm fine. But one of the times we stayed in there was because of the subject matter that you just talked about. We wanted to connect those dots. So every opportunity that we get in these conversations that we have, we do that. I often tell people the story. You know, once upon a time, Valerian, my wife, raise your hand. There she is, my wife Valerian. We used to live in Iowa. Iowa, at the time that we lived in Iowa, was the 5th whitest state in the nation. But the prison population was 25% African American. So, you know, that tells you something about the criminal justice system. And yeah, we certainly try to connect those dots. And one thing that we do now, if we look at the lexicon, the words that we use, we now use the word freedom seeker instead of runaway. We now let folks know that a lot of these police forces that now exist had their roots in paddy rollers or patrollers. You know, those white men who were obligated to patrol the area, because if you're off the plantation as a black person, if you don't have a pass, you are a freedom seeker or a runaway. And as you just stated so eloquently, sir, even after slavery ends, the physical bondage of it, there's still that portion in that 13th Amendment that allows the U.S. to still punish these men. And they criminalize these petty acts. You know, if you're loitering, if you don't have a job, or if you petty theft, they took you and threw you into the prison system. They started renting you back to the plantations. And if you come fast forward with that, you got the chain gangs, you got the prison system that now, you know, they make these products in prison. They're manufacturing things in these prisons. So the system, you know, they got the prison for profit prison. All that has its roots in the criminal justice system and how it has evolved in these United States. So yes, we make those connections, especially in those conversations that we have around the campfire.
Okay, I see someone with a microphone right there.
Thank you. Joe, I'm directing this question to you because I've probably heard Herb's point of view a dozen or more times. 2 questions, and I'll ask them combined. What is the one dwelling that you slept in that you remember most, and why? And the second part of that would be, what's the one that got away, and will you catch it this time?
Well, the one I remember the most is the one in Texas, Brenham, Texas. Anybody here from Texas? Brenham, Texas is the home of Bluebell ice cream. So I stayed in a place called Seward Plantation. And there, I stood on an authentic auction block. And standing on that auction block, these thoughts that went through my head about people standing on auction blocks to be bidded on, these same people having to bare their backs to that potential buyer, to show that potential buyer that there's no marks on your back. Because to the potential buyer, that's the sign of a defiant, enslaved person, a person you wouldn't want to buy to put amongst your already docile and broken people, to give them ideas of freedom. So that's certainly most memorable. Well, the one that got away, it's the White House. You know, we built that. So I think there's a window of opportunity now, at least for the next year. You know, I've got a fighting chance. You know, we'll see what happens a year from now. But we've got an endorsement from Congressman Clyburn on the book. I'm hoping we can leverage that and get that get that sleepover in the White House. But so far that's the one that's gotten away.
I do think I saw a hand, yes, several in the back, and then I think I saw one over here as well.
Hi, I'm British, and I know that the British Empire abolished slavery in 1834. That was the second act, and the first act was in 1807, where they abolished the slave trade, but that wasn't the same thing as abolishing slavery, so they got around to that 30 years later. The only mechanism legally that they found to do that was to actually compensate slave owners, to pay them out of taxpayers' money, which they only just finished paying off maybe some 5-7 years ago, actually. I was wondering what, and I'm sorry if this is a perfunctory historic question, but I was wondering what the mechanism for the United States government was in contrast to the British approach to actually abolishing slavery and to get these enslaved people into freedom.
Yeah. Well, hey, you know, reparations were paid when slavery ended in Washington, D.C. Reparations were paid to the owners for loss of property. Reparations is a very scary word, man. You mention that word and people go to their corners and start yelling at each other. Now, as far as the slave trade being abolished, it was an international law because none of those colonizers, those European colonizing countries, wanted the other to have advantage over them. So it was an international law that they enforced. You know, 20 years prior to that, it being abolished, the importation thereof, you know, we had an opportunity in 1787 when we were considering the ratification of our Constitution. We could have gotten rid of slavery right then and there, but, you know, some of those Southern demands said, no, we want to do this thing another 20 years. And after, of course, that 20 years, the importation stopped. There was still a little black marketing, if you will, smuggling, if you will, but it wasn't necessary because that gave way to the domestic slave trade. You know, people went into the breeding business after, after 1808. And then, of course, here in these United States, right here, cradle of secession, right here at Charleston, South Carolina, that election of Lincoln, and that being the final straw for those Southern slave owners. I had the pleasure of spending the night at Bellamy Mansion in Wilmington, North Carolina, and I used to often hear from Confederate reenactors, well, the Civil War wasn't necessary because it was on its way out. Well, if you visit Bellamy Mansion, it compares to, you know, the William Aiken House and all that significance. And I now say, well, I don't think William Aiken or anybody living in one of these nice, beautiful houses would just willingly give that up, you know, just because it's it's the moral thing to do. The economics wouldn't just wouldn't let them do that. So I think the abolitionists that we give so much credit, we got to rethink them also, because some of the abolitionists were about freedom, helping them to get their freedom, but they said, but not equality. Well, we'll help you get your freedom, but you get on the ship and you go to Africa. In other words, just keep it moving, be free, be free somewhere else. So a lot of what came about here in these United States, you know, it took generations, and because it took generations, you know, we're still dealing with the residuals of that institution. I already spoke about the wealth gap that exists, and when we talk about that wealth gap, you know, that R words comes back into the conversation. You know, reparations, and we're now in a season between now and next November. We're going to hear a lot about reparations. Then it's going to be an election, and then it'll go away again. But you know, our freedom that we have obtained here in these United States, yeah, freedom from physical bondage, but we're still dealing with the residuals of that institution here in these United States. I hope that helped.
Yes, thank you so much for that answer. I do believe we have reached our time. I'm looking for okay, great. Okay, I'm gonna let Jeffrey, we'll take one more and then, okay.
I just had a question about, you know, I know your conversation isn't to invoke any sort of anger, but being a black man, sometimes these conversations make me angry, as they should, I think. And I'm just curious how you manage that feeling of anger, like maybe when you were on that auction block in Texas, and what you think our ancestors want us to feel when managing the anger we might feel.
That, hey, about 2 weeks ago, I almost fought a tourist, man. It got that bad, you know. And that wasn't the first time. That was not the first time I almost fought a tourist, but the other times it was just between me and the tourist, you know. And we kind of handled it, and we kind of went our separate ways. But this gentleman, man, he got loud. He said, "We got any kids in here?" He said, "Man, your presentation was bullshit." And he said it loud. People started to gather, you know. So I had a conversation. I always have a conversation with. We got a group of living historians that we travel with, and what we're planning right now, we're trying to get funding for us, because trying to tell the story, there are those who look like me, who share our DNA, that would much rather the story go away, much rather us not tell our own stories. Now, those numbers are fewer, but there's certainly those who don't look like me, or white folks, who would like the story to go away also, and they make it known. They express themselves accordingly. When I started this project 13 years ago, somebody wrote, "If you want to get in contact with your ancestors, go visit the ape section at the zoo." Yeah. So if I was thin-skinned, I would have said 13 years ago, you know, forget this. But I knew that I was on a mission. I knew that, you know, our enslaved ancestors had to be honored. But my therapy, how I deal with it, put more dates on the calendar. You know, get these invitations. You know, 13 years ago, man, I was humble, hat in hand, shuffling my feet, trying to find a place where I could apply this idea. And now it's the opposite. You know, folks call me. And now it's, again, as I stated, it's more than the sleepover now. It's the conversations that people want to have. You know, next Monday night, I got a group that I'll be talking to. They sent me this email. They said, you know, last March we came to Magnolia Plantation and Gardens, and we were a part of the conversation. We liked it. So we would like to bring a larger group of 40 people from our congregation to experience one of those campfire conversations. So that's my therapy. That, knowing that I can go to these places, and knowing that these people want me to come here, and getting invited back. Now that's the ultimate, when folks invite me back. So going to these places and do what I do is my therapy. That's how I deal with it.
Turn it over to you.
Mr. Frazier, Mr. McGill, I'd like to say on behalf of this audience, but I also believe on behalf of the Literary Festival, thank you for a very riveting conversation on the importance of being in tune not only with our history, but on the importance of being in tune with difficult conversations so that we all might progress together. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me again in giving them a round of applause.